everyone. I'm probably an unfamiliar face for most of you. My name is Levterov. I speak with an accent, as you can tell. And when I was, it's been about 22 years ago, I was in Spokane, Washington, and I was at a conference. And we were talking with some friends, and all of a sudden these two kids come, and little, young kids, and just start staring at me. And I was like, did I mess up the way I dressed, or maybe we just ate, I spilled something on me. I look normal, And all of a sudden, as we're talking, one of the kids goes, "Can I ask you something?" And so I said, "Sure." And so the kid goes, "Do you really speak that way, or are you just making it up?" So I'm not making it up. This is just my accent. I am a Texan now, but I do come from Bulgaria. And I'm happy to have my family with me here. If you guys want to just wave. I'm the church planting coordinator for the Texas conference. I do that part-time, but I'm also just a pastor. I'm a church planter. So today you will have to put up with my passion for planting because I have a special something from the Bible, a story, an idea that I want to share with you. I remember I was a young boy and I loved soccer. I still do. But I had this shirt that I had gotten that was the first official authentic jersey that I ever got. It was from my favorite team, and so I had used it so much that it started, falling apart. I mean, it had holes in it, and my parents will say, "Okay, please just throw that shirt away. We're going to get you a new one." I said, "No, that shirt is my favorite one. I'm not throwing it away." So every time I go out to play soccer, I will try to put that shirt on until finally my dad said, "This is embarrassing. People will think we don't have money to dress you up. You got to throw it away." And he promised me to get me the brand new shirt of the team. But that idea still wasn't appealing enough as keeping my old shirt because it was my first one. It was my favorite one. Ever done that? Have you ever held to something that is so precious to you, you're so used to it that even when you're ready to get something better, you will not give it up because it just is the familiar, it is what you have always wanted. See, there is a story in the Bible that most of us know. It is found in Genesis chapter 12, a story of a gentleman who had a very comfortable life. He was a successful businessman. His whole family had done really well in the city of Ur. And then God finally came and invited them to move out of there. Let's go to Genesis chapter 12, and we're going to read verses 1 through 3. Then the Lord said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all people on earth will be blessed through you." A story we know very well, right? I don't know if you have ever had to move. I would assume I see a lot of young faces here. How many of you have never had to move? You're still living in the first house where you were born. All right, how many of you have moved? Just to kind of be sure that my logic is right. We have all experienced that, right? Now, I'm going to ask you, how many of you like moving? Am I the only one? I love moving. You know why? Because I get to go through some of my stuff, throw it away, clean all of my things that I have accumulated. Until recently, we had an opportunity we were thinking, should we get something that's a little bit farther out of the city and get a house that will have a little bit more land? And then I started thinking, that means we got to move. I forgot I just turned 40. I just don't want to move now. Imagine someone comes to you and you have a very well set life and you get the message from God, okay, leave everything you have and go. See, that familiar always pulls us back, doesn't it? I wonder how easy it was for Abraham to do this. The story tells us he just accepted the call of God and he moved with his whole family, but I'm sure deep inside he looked back and he said, you know what? It's hard to pack all this stuff. Plus, God, the swimming pool I have here, I don't think I can give it up. And the business, it's all developed. Why now? Can I save a little bit more money? Many times God comes into our lives and He says, listen, your life has gotten too comfortable. I'm calling you to give it up and take a step out. And I know we all look at Abraham and say, yes, we got to do this. But I want us to consider something that goes a little bit deeper than just Abraham being obedient and following God. Because Hebrews 11 tells us that Abraham was a father of what? He's the father of faith. He's the man of faith. I mean, we look at Abraham as the one who is the pillar of faith in the Bible, right? So how does faith and obedience really fit in this story? I would like to take you to Hebrews 11:1, the text where we go to find the definition of faith. Hebrews 11:1. And here is what we read about faith. We're going to read Hebrews 11:1 and 2. Now faith is, if here a few pages still flipping, or if you have your phone, just turn it to Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Here we find that faith is getting into something that is unfamiliar, right? So Abraham was called, the reason why he's called the father of faith is because God says, Abraham, leave everything that you have, leave the place that you have, and go into the unfamiliar. Could it be that throughout the story of Abraham, God is reaching out to us and saying, it is hard for me to bless you if you're just happy at where you are? Didn't Jesus talk about transformation taking us and making us new people? God is calling Abraham and telling him, leave this place, I have something better for you. But God, I'm leaving the nicely set permanent house for a tent. For it seems like, at least in Ur, we don't know what life was like in Haran, but in Ur, it was very comfortable. People had houses, made out of stone. Very, very good. Considered pretty well-off place to live at, according to our standards and their standards at that time. God was saying, Abraham, if I'm to bless you, you need to have faith. Which means faith is leaving what you are comfortable with, what we know, and going into what we don't know. See, many times we say faith is just to believe in God. No, faith is the requirement for God to make the change that is necessary for Him to transform our lives from what they are to what they need to be. But it is hard for us to give up on the familiar. See, we are ready to stick to what we know, even if it is worse for us or if it is not good for us. Isn't that why so many times we hear people who say, man, I hate my job, and yet they stay in it? Because it's comfortable. Because if I leave my job, what am I going to do? Maybe I'm not going to get a better one. How about relationships? Ever talk to people who are being abused and suffer in a relationship and they'll never leave? I'm talking in a very dysfunctional relationship. Why? Because it is a lot more secure to stay in the familiar. Animals are different than us in this. that animals, even though corrupted by sin, most of the time they do what they are supposed to, what they were designed to. You know, you take bees, for example, right? You know, they go and they make these perfectly shaped little cells where they put the honey. You take spiders, they make this cowboy webs that look so, again, beautiful and perfectly shaped. You don't have to teach them how to do that. We just had, our dog just had little ones, and it was interesting how in the beginning we were trying to help the little ones go feed, and you know, we spent like a couple of days watching them almost every hour, and finally my father-in-law was there. He goes like, you know what, you know that your dog has like an internal instinct of how to do this. You don't have to be helping her. And sure enough, when we pulled back, she will go in when they were hungry, they will eat, and she will go out, walk around, and I'm thinking, man, they are hungry, but I'll take her in and she'll just walk out. And then like a few minutes, like an hour or two later, she will walk in, lay down, they'll eat again. Because animals have this thing that to follow the program, the best that God has placed in them. The reason why God didn't call animals to have faith is not just because maybe they don't reason as well as us, but because the difference was that humans lost the ability to do what we are supposed to do. And faith is the journey of us living the familiar, what we've learned in life to do, and going back to the unfamiliar, to what God expects from us to do. See, faith makes us being really, truly human once again. Faith aligns us with moving away from what we know and we think is good for us to moving to what God knows is best for us. Even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it means leaving my comfort zone, faith means realigning myself with God, leaving the temporary for the eternal. Even though the eternal here, in Abraham's case, it was a bit different, wasn't it? He left the permanent house, the stone house, for the temporary tent, right? But see, what seems to us permanent to this earth, Jesus says is temporary, and what seems to us uncomfortable many times is what God says is the eternal. You know, if we go back to the story, I want to jump back to Genesis chapter 12, because the story continues there, very interesting. When we go to back to the same chapter we began, Genesis chapter 12, I'm going to jump down to verse 6. We're going to read verses 6 through 9. You got there? All right. Genesis 12, verses 6 through 9. And Abraham traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land, and the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to Abraham, sorry, his name wasn't changed yet, and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he, Abraham, built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Now listen to verse 8. From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west of Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. And then Abraham set out and continued toward the Negev. What does Abraham do when God shows him the land? What did he build? An altar, right? But the verse also says that he pitched his tent. Very, just what he would usually do, because he wanted to worship God. And so in verse 10, Abraham goes to Egypt, right? Because there was famine in the land, and he goes and spends time there. The Bible doesn't tell us how long. He kind of drifts back to his old habit of lying and has a cool experience with God. God brings him back, and Abraham feels remorseful. And so we get all the way down to verse 13. And now we read Genesis 13, verses 1 through 4. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. And Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came back to Bethel, right? That's where he was in the first place when he built the altar and he pitched his tent. Now listen to this. To the place, it says he went back to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier. Where was his tent? By this time, he probably had changed a few tents, I would think. Abram was a well-off person. By this time, I mean, after all the weather and the abuse, even if he had the same tent, it had gotten pretty kind of beaten down. But when he goes back, listen to what is still standing there. Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar, there Abram called on the name of the Lord, and the verse tells us that he worshipped God again. See, Abram knew that what he had to invest into were the permanent things from God's perspective. See, the altar will stand, the tent will be changed. How many of us invest in the temporary? In our jobs? Because we have these great opportunities to become the CEO of the company. How many of us invest in our properties because we have this dream to have the most comfortable place we can ever build on earth? How many of us invest into building our bank accounts for security, just in case something will happen? It's okay, be responsible, God says. I'm sure Abraham took care of his people, but he was investing in the permanent. The first thing he will do is build the altar, and then he will pitch his tent, because the tent will be gone, but the altar will be staying. Back to faith. We have been so tied up to where we are and how comfortable our lives have gotten that many times we have forgotten to do the mission of God. Isn't that true? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I'm going to ask you, when was the last time you led someone to Jesus? And I'm not saying getting them baptized, okay? I'm just saying you led them from a non-believer to a believer. Could it be that we're so busy with the temporary things that give us the comfort, the familiarity that we have, that we neglect to get out of our comfort and follow God's leading into the unknown, into the uncomfortable, through faith, to discover the purpose He has for our lives? See, if you keep reading Hebrews 11, you'll find that Moses is mentioned, that he preferred to go out with his people than be called the son of Pharaoh. Jericho is mentioned, that by faith the walls of Jericho fell down because everyone thought that what the Israelites were doing was crazy. It wasn't the normal, it wasn't the comfortable. I don't know if you watch VeggieTales, but I love VeggieTales. I wish I had the clip here of the VeggieTales walking around the walls of Jericho. What were, those of you who have seen it, what were the Jericho soldiers doing? Smashing them with ice cream, right? Falling on their head. I mean, it's funny. It's a kid's interpretation of the story, but you know, imagine how funny you were looking, walking around this wall, and people are saying, you know how long we've been here? And you think you're going to conquer us by just walking around and around. You're going to get dizzy and fall on your own. And yet what happened when they followed the crazy leading of God? Moving from the comfortable into the uncomfortable, the walls crumbled down. Then there was another story in Hebrews 11. I'm just mentioning them. Go back and read the chapter. It's full of those stories of Rahab, a prostitute, a lady who had a very, very immoral life. That was the familiar, that's what she knew. Maybe, you know, that's what she was taught since she was little, until she met the representatives of God. And she left the familiar and went into the unfamiliar, not knowing if she was even going to be respected, because I'm sure she heard about the law of Moses and some of the things that people like her deserve to receive as punishment. And yet she still said, God, I'm going to choose to trust you. See, in order for us to experience the blessings of God, we have to leave the temporary for the permanent. We have to leave the comfortable and familiar for the better promise of God. Then why is it so hard? Why is it so hard for us to do what God has called us to do? I want us to go to Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 through 38. Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 through 38. Listen to the context of this chapter, of these words of Jesus, because we usually go directly to the words that Jesus said, about the harvest, but we miss the context. Matthew chapter 9, verse 35. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. My friends, what do we have in our lives that is more important than the people who have not found a Savior in Jesus yet? Is it a job? Is it a house? Let me push it even farther. Is it a church that I'm comfortable in? Is it that I have figured life out and I've gotten into this routine, and so my life is good, and if other people want to know, they'll come and ask me? Jesus, the text tells us, he went to every town and every village, and he reached out to these people, and his heart was breaking up because of the compassion he had for them, because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then verse 37, then Jesus looked at his disciples and he said, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. See, what makes me passionate about what I've adopted to be the mission of my life, to encourage churches, congregations, including my own, including myself, pastors and lay people, to venture into planting new churches, is because there is a lot more people to be reached than the ones that are right here. And see, sometimes we feel that the church that we have is good enough for everyone to come and join. And we forget that there are other towns, that there are other cities that haven't been reached. I'm thinking about Austin. What is the total population of the larger Austin metro area? Anybody knows? Sorry, shout louder. Okay, that's more the city. The overall metroplex area is about 1.9 million. Okay, that includes Cedar Park, Georgetown, and they're kind of including here Pflugerville. It's the whole area. 1.9 million people. Now imagine, let's say that an average town, an average city, a decent city. I used to live, by the way, I was fortunate or misfortunate, but I enjoyed every minute of it, to live in Washington, California, Colorado, and Wyoming, before I went to Michigan and then came to Texas. So I've seen all these different places. Now in Wyoming, there are more people living in New York above the 50th floor, is what I was told when I went to my church, than in the whole state of Wyoming. Did you get that? More people live in New York above the 50th floor than in the whole state of Wyoming. So a decent sized town there was about, 30,000 people, maybe with the exception of 2 towns. Imagine Austin. Let's say that an average size city is 100,000 people. You have 1.9, almost 2 million. In fact, by next year, you'll probably be at 2 million here. How many 100,000 cities is that? 20, right? So you have 20 cities right here. Let me ask you this. If there was a city right here with 100,000 people, would you say that we need to have a church in that city? We cannot reach that many people. You need to have another community that's going to reach them, right? I meet all the time people who give me, all these arguments against why shouldn't we plant? We just need to fill our churches more. Well, let me just tell you something. Just because you send missionaries out or a group to plant somewhere doesn't mean you lose your vision here. You keep on growing, right? God doesn't say, well, plant and stop growing here. No, you keep doing what God is doing, but we got to think about those that haven't been reached yet. Jesus had compassion on them. And he said to the disciples, I'm looking for workers to go out and make a difference. We know, however, that when Abraham moved out, he had to sacrifice. What did he sacrifice? Family? Relatives that didn't come with him maybe. The closest family came with him. Anything else? Security and job? Shout louder because it's hard to hear up here. Culture, right? Oh, you're with familiar people. Very good point. I'm kind of used to life here. Talking about the culture shock, coming from Bulgaria here and going to the first camp. I remember going with my friend, going into the bathroom to take a shower, and I'm turning this knob and there is no water, so I came out. I said, it's broken, it doesn't work. I had been here for 2 weeks. They took me to Camp Maivadan by Spokane, Washington. I'm saying it doesn't work, and my friend Jeff, who used to joke with me a lot, he came in and he's like, yes, it works. I just took a shower. Comes in and pulls the thing. I never seen, that you need to pull that knob. You always turn it back home. So culture shock, right? Going to a new place with new people. Feeling uncomfortable, looking like a fool sometimes, and you have to laugh at yourself, right? It's good to have fun and laugh at yourself at times. What else did he sacrifice? Comfort. Just being in one place, not knowing what tomorrow will bring. More or less, knowing that you go home, you have your family, you have your food, you know where your bed is. Now you're going out and you're packing. Imagine camping for years like Abraham did. Even though he didn't camp every day. If you're like me, you'll never accept that. I'll say, God sent me to the moon, but not camping. I just don't enjoy it that much. I do it because my family likes it, okay? But again, there was so much cost involved in it. But was it worth it? Why was it worth it? What did Abram gain by following God and moving from the comfortable to the uncomfortable? He gained new land, promised land that was a lot better than anything he ever had. He became the father of a nation, even though it took quite a bit of time for that to happen. That's a whole nother sermon, right? How many kids did Abraham have? 1. How many kids did Isaac have? 2. How long did God's promise take to be fulfilled? Sometimes things don't happen quickly. Just because they're God's will doesn't mean that they'll happen really quickly and everything will be like really awesome and nice right away. But God says, you keep following my leading. I'm in charge of making the promise come true. But as he followed, he became the father of nations. He became not only famous and popular because of the Israelites, but think about this. Would you be here if it wasn't for Abraham? Maybe God would have found somebody else, we can't say for sure, but we are here, the Christians are here because through Abraham came Messiah, and through Messiah came Christianity, and through Christianity we are here today. It was in the early 30s, 1930s. My grandma came from a very well-known communist family, living in the village where she was living. Atheism was big because, again, few people were Orthodox, but most people didn't believe in God, and especially in her family. So one day, this gentleman knocks on the door and comes in, and there is my great-grandma, my grandma, and her husband, and he just asked them if he can share with them the story of Jesus with his Bible. This is the first time Grandma said she had ever heard about Jesus. She had heard, the words God and Jesus, but she never went to church. Her family was totally opposed to it. So out of 7 kids, she's the only one who kind of got exposed to it. And long story short, this guy kept on coming back, studying the Bible with them, and they accepted Jesus. This was a missionary who came, there was a missionary who came from Germany, won a guy in north part of Bulgaria. This guy brought to Jesus the gentleman who was in my grandma's village. And so this gentleman now was coming to invite her to follow Jesus. I want to ask you, when he led my grandma to Jesus, do you think he was thinking about God's plan to have 5-generation Adventists, to have 4 pastors out of that family? No, he probably was just looking at my grandma and great-grandma and my grandma and my grandfather and said, you know what, if I can just help these 3 people, that will be great. See, the reason why we need to think about expanding the kingdom beyond ourselves right here, not just to individuals, but planting new communities of faith, new churches, is because the difference that those churches will make in leading one person to Jesus could be a chain reaction for leading hundreds of people to come to Him. Because of the sacrifice of one old gentleman, by the way, he has a very, very funny story. He was the worst drunkard in the village. Everyone knew him, that if there was a fight, he will be there. The guy who won my grandparents to Jesus. And one day, it was so funny that he was so mean that one day his friends got frustrated because he wouldn't go to parties with them, he wouldn't drink with them, he wouldn't get in the fights there that they had in the village, and he was a big wrestler too. So finally one day one of his friends came and like started literally just using profanity against him and said, well, why don't you take a break from your God, you know, and you're missing so much of our fun. And he said, hey, leave me alone, I'm out of that stuff. Well, the guy kept on irritating him. And finally, the people around him tell the story how he turned and he said, listen, I'm going to take a minute break, but you're not going to walk away from here alive, so you better leave me alone. You don't want me to take a break from my Christianity. That's the past of that guy who had accepted Jesus before my grandparents. But when you think about the chain reaction, it makes me wonder how many hundreds of people have I missed to lead to Jesus? Myself. When I have ignored the call of God sometimes to speak up or be a part of a group that is that is starting a new community of church. By the way, the reason why church planting needs to be part of the evangelism and the ministry and the vision of every church is because not everyone is going to come here, guys, in your congregation. What church planting does is it takes a group of people that become missionaries either in new geographic area or among new demographic group. We're going to talk a lot this afternoon about that, and I'm going to share with you some interesting statistics and some of the ways that you can think yourself of how can you incorporate the whole idea of starting new congregations as a missionary or as a part of a core team this afternoon. We are going to have some really, really good seminars, even just for your own, to encourage you to do soul winning. So if you can come we're going to start at 2:30, not at 2 o'clock as the flyer says, because we realize that the people from the other churches cannot get here on time. But if you want to stay, it will be great for you. But I want to share with you just a few statistics that I hope will be encouraging. Can we get the... And if you can just bring me directly to the first slide, be sure. I don't know if my clicker will be working. All right. I want to show you now what the city of Austin looks like. These are the churches we have, okay? You have the orange ones are all the English-speaking churches. Now, that doesn't mean Anglo churches, okay? There might be, they might be ethnic churches, but English is the official language. Okay, the purple churches are the Spanish churches. The red one is a new Spanish church plant, and the green ones are new English church plants, even though the one down in the middle, the heart of Austin, has become a church. Actually, I think it kind of came from this congregation. Now, when we do church planting, I have to say that very openly. Sometimes there are church plants that start because we plan them, okay? But when I was in Wyoming, I had to deal with a church plant, not because I planned it, but because it just happened because of big friction in one of my churches. But God can use some of those frictions to build new communities, right? And so anyway, it doesn't matter how it happens, if we're able to turn the negative energy into a positive energy, and that church becomes a soul-winning church, I praise God for it, as hard as it might be. So, we look at this map, there are 15 churches here, okay? What is the population of Austin? Almost 2 million, right? In this whole bigger area, okay? This is actually more than 2 million, but we'll just take 2 million as the round number. So, how many churches do we have per what is the ratio, I guess, of church per population? I'll just give it to you. I know some of you are better in math than that, but it's about 1 to 150,000. Okay? So we have one church for 150,000 people. Okay? Now, I want to show you something else. I'm going to go to the next slide. I want to show you how the whole Adventist movement started in Austin. You will see here, and again, I took that from statistics. If it's wrong, let me know. But this is what it seems, that this church, Austin First, which is what this church used to be, right? Is the one that started in 1895. Am I correct on the date? Okay, pretty close anyway, all right? So there was one church in Austin. What was the population there in Austin at that time? On the very right side, 14,000 people, right? Was one church enough for Austin? Probably, okay? The rule of thumb is if you have one church for 25,000 people, you're doing really well to evangelize that group, that demographic group. So then in 1910, there was another church that started, Elgin, am I pronouncing it correctly? Elgin, yeah, church, which is nearby again, and by that time, even though Elgin is not really part of the downtown Austin, it's almost like a little bit more separate. There were about 30,000 people in the Austin area, and we have two churches. How long did it take to plant one church? The first church, the second church. 15 years, okay? Let me ask you this, just from your own heart, how long do you think a church needs to comfortably send a group and plant another congregation? Is it fair to say 10, 15 years? Is that good enough of a time, or maybe 20? We should be able to send a group in 20 years, right? If we reach out and we grow, all right? So, then it took for the third church to be planted, it took how many more years? 50 years to add one more church, okay? And the population by then was already 186,000. And then in 1970s, we have 5 churches. You see all the names of the churches there. Until we get to 2016, we have 17 churches. Praise the Lord for that, right? I mean, you see progression. But now I want to show you something else. Look at the total membership of all these 15 churches and the total attendance. I'm more concerned about attendance because attendance is more realistic than membership, right? Do we agree on that? Not all members always attend. So there are there will be about 2,500 members. Attendance will be close to 1,800, but I didn't have the exact numbers. And the latest numbers, that's why I didn't put it there. I just put the numbers I had. Without light bearers, Austin Central, and Alpha, which is the regional church, we have attendance of 1,500 people. I want to ask you this question. How many of you believe that if there was one church in Austin until today, it will have 1,500 people attendance? Do you know of any churches who have that big of an attendance? This story repeats in every single place where we plant churches. In North Dallas, we moved from the Richardson Church. There were 7 churches that came out of the Richardson Church, and then another 5 came out of those 7. We have a total attendance of close to 3,000 people. Do you know what the Richardson Church is? And it's a very healthy church. Do you know what their max attendance has been? 680 people. What does church planting do? It creates new communities where new people can join. And by the way, it is always true, 2 churches of the same size, we're talking 2 healthy churches of the same size, will reach more people than one church that will combine those 2. because you're multiplying location. It's just multiplying locations, multiplying people. Also, when you're a part of a church plant, you're a lot more active because, you know, unless you bring new people, what's going to happen to the church? It's going to die, right? You're not going to have a church. So it excites people more. And there are other things that happen that we'll cover this afternoon. But I want you to realize that if we stay with one church, if we don't plant new churches, we will never reach the people that multiple congregations will do. Now I want to take you to this as we get to a close. What happened is, here are the percentages of how the church grew, okay? For the first 10 years it grew 50%, the second 50 years, 50 years from then it grew only 33% and so on. I want to give you a what-if scenario. Let's say that there was one church in 1895. Everyone with me? We have only Austin First. But Austin First decided that they will plant a church every 10 years. Fair enough? I'm using 10 because it's easier to calculate for people who are not, you know, that fond of math. So, here is what's going to happen if each church decides to plant a church every 10 years. How many churches would we have had today? 4,000 churches. How would that be? How would that look to have 4,000 Adventist churches in a city of 2 million people? Now here is why I'm bringing that up. How about if only half of these churches decided to adopt that vision? Or maybe a third? How many churches do we have today? Here in Austin? 15. 15, that includes the church plants. So well, I guess you might be counting people. I was trying to cut I'm not counting St. Marcus in those places, but anyway, let's say 15. Even if 1/3 of these churches decided to do what God has called us to do, to go and plant new churches and win new people, what will the number be today? I'm sharing this for this reason. Not everyone is called to go and start new churches, okay? And don't feel bad if you don't have that calling in your heart. But I want you to consider and pray for it, because God has a plan for this city. And I believe that it is to reach more than the 1,500 people that are already coming. And the reality shows us that the best way to do that will be if we all go out and we all learn to look at people with different eyes and go out and do ministry among them, not expect them to come to us. Create new mission groups. Build small groups for your church. Create new communities where people can come in. Because the numbers are showing us that this is how churches grow. The growing churches are churches who start new communities of faith in new geographic areas and new demographic groups. Did you know that you have over 40,000 refugees that come in this city every year? Anyone reaching out to the refugees? How about if God is calling some of us to be out there and reach out to that new population group? There are centers in Austin where we have close to we define 2 circles, and I'll share those in this afternoon as we talk about the vision for Austin. But there are 2 circles where we have close to 300,000 people and no Adventist church in that radius, 5-mile radius. Who will reach these people? For see, Jesus said, the harvest is plentiful. And every time we plant a church in a new community, we see that new people join the church because we have reached out to them. It is not for everyone, but I believe that there are more of us that are called to do this than we realize. But what it takes is learning to look at the community and the world around us with different eyes. Not from our comfort zone, where everything that pushes us out of our comfort zone frustrates us, but with the passion that Jesus had. The verse said Jesus had compassion on them. I want you to see this video before we pray and consider, has God called you to look at the world with different eyes? Sorry. Is there sound that we can get to that?
Kid, every time I'm pulling out, he's right there. Man, and someone needs to talk to his parents, if they're ever at home. What is up with the traffic today? And always, every day, this intersection's always crowded. I hate pulling out of here. I need some of these dumb roads. Oh, there's... Okay, so I'm not even here. Right. Great lady. The princess of parking. Oh, sure. Take the spot. Way to be considerate. Oh, are you kidding me? Unbelievable. Oh.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a great day.
It's about time. Let's see, what do I want?
Yeah, could I add a cookie to that order?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, no problem, only guy in the world. I'm sure you need your cookie. The world, your oyster, and he's serving your cookie.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you so much.
What can I get for you?
Yeah, I'll have a tall decaf macchiato.
Yeah, sure, no problem. $3.85. And it might take a few minutes here. We've got quite a line, obviously, and thanks for your patience.
Great. Yeah, great. Great for me. Win it again. Unbelievable. What? What is... What is that? What in the world? What? What am I supposed to do? How can I do anything about that? Can I even help with that? I don't...
Your coffee, sir.
I can't take this anymore. I gotta get out of here.
Hey, watch it.
Sorry, so sorry.
Hey, buddy, come here.
There are a lot more people in Austin to care for than we have ever imagined. Austin is the most secular city, the fastest growing city metro area in the United States at the moment, #1. By the way, the 10 fastest growing cities, metro areas are right here in Texas. It is time for us to step up and flood the city with the message of Jesus and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Don't you think so? So we are hoping to have every church plant a church. We're looking in planting 6 churches. That's the goal, and maybe we don't get there, but where at least our hope is that we'll plant 6 churches in the next 3 years. We're going to start with the first plant. We want to bring all the churches together because I believe that we don't plant churches to alienate each other. We plant churches because we are all together, one big community. So that new church feels the support of all the current churches. And we're going to talk more about the vision this afternoon, but I want you to consider, have you looked at Austin through the eyes of Jesus? Have you considered getting out of your comfort zone in order to make a difference. To move from the known and familiar into the unknown, because maybe through that we will make a difference in the life of one person that will give a chain reaction for eternity for hundreds and thousands of people. I'm here today because someone decided to go to my village and plant a new church, start a new group. Are you ready to do the same? Dear God, we are marching to Zion. We are marching to that promised land that you have prepared for us, just like Abraham was living with the hope for the blessing that you are going to bring to him. But God, as we are marching, I pray that we realize that there are many more people that could march with us. And so God, as we look around, as we try to listen to your call to get out of our comfort zone and start reaching out to others and grow our existing churches and our groups and study groups and plant new churches, God, we pray that you will help us realize that living the way we have lived in the past cannot be our future. Because we have failed you in many ways for the last 120 years. We haven't been available in your hands, God, the way we should have. So today, I, on behalf of these people, ask for you to come into our hearts. Take a hold of our lives, God. Push us out of our comfort zone. Do whatever it takes for us to start working and aligning yourself with your mission, to be workers in your harvest, and to reach all those people that you have compassion on, God. Help us to look at the world with different eyes, to see the needs and carry your message of love and the good picture of God that you have given us as a Seventh-day Adventist Church to all those who don't have it. It is our prayer, God, but we also know that it is your promise that you will reach many more people, so help us to be a part of it. Help us to dream big with you, God, and see that dream become reality, because you are still the big God we serve. This is my prayer for this church, for this community, for this city, for this state, and for the whole world, Jesus. Let us be harvesters in your field is our prayer. Amen.